As events in Libya loosen Colonel Gaddafi's grip on power, an old accusation comes back to haunt him. Former henchmen accuse him of ordering a mass murder over Scotland more than 20 years ago. In 2009, the only man ever convicted of the bombing of Pan Am 103 climbed the steps of a commercial jet and flew to freedom. Doctors had certified that Abdul Basit Mohamed Ali Al-Megrahi was dying of prostate cancer, and the government of Scotland had released him on compassionate grounds. Having barely served a month in prison for each life lost, many saw Al-Megrahi as a murderer who escaped scot-free.
I don't think it's right to show compassion to a mass murderer like that. I think it was wrong.
We have been in contact with the Scottish government indicating that we objected to this.
The small market town of Lockerbie lies in the southwest of the Scottish lowlands, not far from the border with England. In the town's cemetery, a memorial garden records the names of 270 innocent people, mostly Americans, who were victims of a terrorist atrocity. For George Thompson, a former police detective, the biggest mass murder in British history remains an unsolved crime.
I feel sorry for the relatives. There's been miscarriages of justice which have taken longer than 20 years to resolve. And the relatives deserve an explanation, which has not been forthcoming to date.
December the 21st, 1988, the night of the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. At 6:30 p.m, Pan Am Flight 103 took off from London Heathrow. Next stop, JFK, New York. In the cargo hold was a brown Samsonite suitcase packed with new clothes and a Toshiba radio cassette player. Hidden in the Toshiba were more than 450 grams of high explosive and a detonator. At 7:03, 31,000 feet over Scotland, the bomb exploded. 46.5 seconds later, 200,000 pounds of kerosene ignited as the wings and part of the fuselage crashed onto Lockerbie.
My son was the second police car on the scene. They saw this explosion in the sky and bodies on roofs and chimneys. He told me of bodies having gone through gates and been sliced like through a mincer.
More than 100 bodies landed 3 miles east of Lockerbie, near the village church of Tundergath, where there's a small memorial chapel.
In any murder case, the tentacles stretch out and touch people, and the amount of people who are affected by it is sometimes very surprising. Imagine the enormity of this case.
Hello, Patty. We all made it here finally, all of us, wrapped in your spirit and beauty and splendour of this little spot of heaven. Love you, miss you, bless you.
On the morning after the crash, human remains and plane wreckage lay scattered over 400 square miles of Scottish landscape. Every shard of metal, every scrap of flesh or bone was now a clue in a murder inquiry. Because an American plane had been brought down over Scotland on a flight which originated in Germany, The Lockerbie investigation involved 3 police forces. George Thompson has obtained copies of 3 forces' investigative files, but according to him, they raise more questions than answers.
You know, my heart goes out to the police as well. Having said that, there is something very wrong at the heart of the investigation, and I think that this has got to be resolved someday.
It took more than 10 years and the offer of a $4 million reward to bring 2 of the alleged perpetrators to justice. The 18-month trial took place in a specially built courthouse in Holland, but only after a long legal standoff between Britain, America and Libya had been resolved by Scotland's leading judicial expert.
I came up with a formula that would allow a trial to take place under Scottish criminal procedure, with a Scottish prosecutor, Scottish defence counsel, and with a Scottish presiding judge. And I also suggested that the trial should take place in the Netherlands.
The 2 accused were Abdul Basit al-Megrahi and Lamine Khalifa Fahima. Both had worked for the government of Libya. Though al-Megrahi always denied he was an intelligence officer, he did travel on a coded government passport under an assumed name. On one of his frequent trips to Malta, he allegedly bought clothes that were packed in the same suitcase as the bomb. His co-accused, Fahima, was the Libyan Airlines station manager in Malta. According to a CIA informant, al-Megrahi arrived in Malta with a brown Samsonite suitcase, which Fahima carried through customs onto an Air Malta plane. The bag and the bomb in it were checked through to Pan Am Flight 103. At the end of the trial, the judges ruled that the CIA agent was completely unreliable and acquitted Fahima. Despite this, they found al-Megrahi guilty and sentenced him to 27 years in prison. From his prison in Scotland, al-Megrahi maintained his innocence and launched 2 appeals. George Thompson was hired by al-Megrahi's legal team to investigate the case. For more than 2 years, he visited al-Megrahi in jail almost daily.
When I first met Basit, he had just been given quite a big sentence. And he seems to have lost heart, very quiet. At the start, very dismissive of anything that we were trying to do. But as we got into the actual evidence and we were able to show him that we could make some progress, his mood changed. I can't possibly sit here and say that Basit Megrahi is not guilty. I don't know that. But what I can say is, after a very careful examination of the evidence which convicted him, there's massive holes in it. There's something far wrong with it. And I think had the appeal been allowed to go ahead, all that kind of evidence would have come out, and I think he would have gone home anyway on appeal.
The case against al-Megrahi was assembled from 10,000 tiny scraps of evidence found in and around the crash site. Under Scottish law, every piece of evidence must be signed and countersigned by 2 policemen. Scotland's chief law officer, the Lord Advocate, was Peter Fraser.
I think what reassured the Americans and the police forces and the FBI was when they really got their minds around the requirement under Scots law that everything has to be corroborated. Then they felt much more comfortable that there was going to be a thorough investigation undertaken by the police in Scotland, that every single item of evidence was going to be marked by 2 people.
But according to George Thompson, the correct procedures for evidence, forensics and identification were too often ignored. He believes al-Megrahi was falsely tried.
I trawled through the German files, and when you look closely at some of the stuff and compare it with the evidence that was given in court, it's quite revealing.
As we shall see, a grey shirt found at the crash site was key evidence. The bomb's blast had torn it into 4 shreds and left a fragment of the detonator embedded in its collar.
I could maybe show you this. It's a photograph. This is the pocket fragment of shirt. And if you look at the pocket area, it is badly damaged. Now, if you go to the German copy, it clearly shows that when this piece of material came into police custody, it was not in that condition. It was not damaged. There, see the ragged edges. It's not a good photograph, I know. But it clearly shows that it was intact. If that fragment had been altered for any reason whatsoever by the forensic scientists or by the police, then that would have been recorded in the forensic notebooks, and it hasn't been.
Not only has the shirt's shape changed, but someone, and we don't know who, has altered one of the evidence tags.
Where it says debris, that debris had originally been cloth, but had been changed. That there has been changed from cloth to debris, and that was brought out in court, and despite that, the judges decided to find that there was nothing sinister about it. However, there is something sinister.
What Thompson sees as sinister is the order in which police have signed the tag.
Now, here's what concerns me. If, as claimed, this officer here and that officer there signed the label when it was found in the fields and the crash site, how is it that there, where this officer has signed his name and then underneath put S/Clyde, that's short for Strathclyde, that signature there overwrites that of the officer who accepted it? There's only one explanation for that, and is that that officer there signed that label before he did.
Despite appearances, an expert advised the Scottish Criminal Case Review Commission that this signature does not overwrite the other.
It would be of concern if it was proved that that was, had been altered. Yes, I would be troubled about it, unless it was some inconsequential matter like to correct the spelling or something like that.
In the course of the Lockerbie inquiry, police officers asked at least 193 witnesses to sign 873 evidence tags retrospectively.
If somebody comes along and says, I made a mistake, okay, you accept that. Or somebody comes along and says, well, actually, I had to change it because, actually, you know, I had forgotten the date, whatever. I got the date wrong. People get dates wrong. But here there are too many of those, and I think it either shows an extraordinary lack of care, in fact, more extraordinary than normal, and that shouldn't be in a case of this gravity, or there's something else going on.
Early in 2011, this program took George Thompson to Malta to re-examine evidence and witnesses. Thompson has come to believe that the police version of events is full of holes, and he can prove it.
When I was brought into the case, I found that a lot of attention was being paid as to actually who had done the Lockerbie bombing. If it wasn't McGrackie, who was it? I felt quite strongly that if you were going to attack the conviction, you had to attack the evidence which convicted him. So I took a very, very close look at the clothing evidence.
Straddling the trade route between Italy and Libya, the Mediterranean island of Malta has, for 5,000 years, been a crossroads for rival civilizations.
Hello, Mr. Navarra. Hello, it's George Thompson here.
Thompson checked in to one of Malta's many tourist hotels and started to follow the trail of evidence that first brought the police to Malta. The grey shirt was one of several items of clothing whose labels showed they were made in Malta and sold in a small clothes shop. The co-owner of the shop was a certain Tony Gauci, the most important single witness in the case.
We're now coming down into the Slima area where Gauci's shop is. Just up here on the left-hand side is the actual shop. I don't think is there very much now. The shop's just on the left-hand side here. In fact, it's closed. It's the one that says Mary's House, just right on the left.
On September the 1st, 1989, police visited Tony Gauci's shop, Mary's House. The statement they took from Tony Gauci was to be the most significant in the entire case for the prosecution.
It was around 6:30 p.m., just before closing time. A man had entered the shop and he started to look at various garments. The man's behavior was strange. That is why I can now remember. He asked for a design jacket, and when I asked him for his size, he just said, "It's not for me." On picking out the trousers, I asked him what size. Then he said, more or less my size. It was as if anything I suggested he buy, he would take it.
Gauci's statement includes a detailed list of what the customer had bought some 9 months earlier, and even the exact amount paid for each item.
It's remarkable. And his memory just doesn't stop there. He remembers how the man paid him. He says that he paid him with Maltese £10 notes.
Thompson first crossed paths with Tony Gauci almost 10 years ago.
I came out to Malta in December 2001, and while I was here I got a call from the investigation team who were looking at the defence of Mr miscarraige. And they asked me if I would have a look at Tony Gauci.
Tony Gauci's testimony was crucial. Anything that weakened Gauci's credibility weakened the prosecution case. So, posing as a tourist, Thompson paid a visit to Mary's house. As soon as Thompson entered the shop, Gauci noticed he had a Scottish accent.
Tony Gauci was in the back shop. He came running out, almost shouting, "Are you from Scotland?" And when we said, "Yeah," he says, "I'm a very important person in Scotland." "How are you important?" The Lockerbie case. It wasn't a case of me trying to get him to talk to me. I had a bigger job trying to get him to stop. And he went on and he told us quite a lot, to the extent that I reported back to the team in London and they asked me to tape him.
Improvising as best he could, Thompson concealed an amateur video camera in a shoulder bag. He pushed the record button before meeting Gauci at a pub called the Lady Di.
I went in the following day with tape equipment, engaged him in conversation again, and he quite happily told me about all the places the police had taken him, why they'd taken him there.
Have you ever fished the pool at Lockerbie? We went to go far, breathing far. All right.
What Thompson learned from his secret recording was that Tony Gauci had been on several all-expenses-paid trips to Scotland.
And one very important bit he says they wanted me to go back in the car with them to make sure that I was saying the same things, saying the right things. So there was no doubt at all Mr Gauci was coached.
If he is offered trips, all expenses paid trips to Scotland, if he is put up in very expensive hotels, if he is taken on salmon fishing expeditions, this seems to me to go beyond the relationship that I would expect investigators of a crime and prosecutors of a crime to have with one of their witnesses.
George Thompson was not the only person whose conscience was troubled by the Al-Megrahi case. A scientist by training, John Cameron has for 35 years been a minister in the Church of Scotland.
Nelson Mandela decided to look at the evidence because he said there was a big problem with the forensic, that this was a miscarriage of justice. Mandela was a lawyer anyway, and he approached the Scottish Church and asked them to look into this. And I wrote a 4,000-word report on this.
The focus of Dr. Cameron's report was the science.
The report said that the air accident investigators had pretty much cracked the case within the first few months. They knew from pretty early on that there was a bomb had been placed in the forward luggage hold. They were able to find the remains of the brown Samsonite case in which the bomb was contained. They even found fragments of the Toshiba cassette recorder in which the bomb had been housed.
Bombs concealed in a Toshiba and other electronic devices had been found in Germany 2 months before the crash. That October, police rounded up members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. These ingenious and deadly devices were activated by a barometric trigger. PFLP-GC extremists had already bombed 3 planes using barometric triggers, so they were seen as the likeliest suspects. But then the whole direction of the investigation changed. Government forensic scientists said they discovered this embedded in the collar of a grey shirt. It was a fragment of circuit board, and it suggested that the bomb was triggered not by a barometric fuse, but by an electronic timer. The fragment was part of a timer made by a Swiss firm called Mibo.
It was the identification of this fragment of circuit board as belonging to a Mibo timer, the majority of which, the vast majority of which, were supplied to Libya, that, according to the prosecution, led them first to focus their attention on Libya. Before then, the attention of the investigators, the investigating team, had been on Palestinian groups and not on the Libyans.
Libya had imported Toshiba radios for its domestic market, so it was plausible that a Toshiba radio bomb with a Mibo timer could also have been assembled by Libyans. This tiny fragment of timer was the crucial evidence that was said to link Libya and ultimately Al-Megrahi to the Pan Am atrocity. In 1989, the FBI and the Federal Aviation Administration conducted a series of tests to replicate the explosion in the Pan Am jet.
Any scientific test has got to be reproducible. So they had exploded different bombs like that to see what happened.
Experts were later able to establish that fragments of circuit board or a timer could survive an explosion and not be vaporized in the blast. But the work of the British forensic scientist Dr. Thomas Hayes left one huge question about the fragment of the timer unanswered.
This was a slight problem for the prosecution because Hayes hadn't tested the fragment to see if it had any residue from an explosion. He hadn't thought this was important.
Apparent alterations to the evidence tag raised major questions about who found the timer fragment and when.
The labelling was very weird, and Hayes' name appears in various positions and police names seem to overwrite it or underwrite it. And it looks as if he did some experimental work on this fabulous fragment before it was actually ever discovered, which was really pretty amazing.
Dr. Thomas Hayes also altered the forensic logbook in which he recorded the date he discovered the Timer fragment.
It was obvious from his log, when he presented this log to the court, to show that it was done on the 12th of May. It looks as if that he'd inserted a page in his log, because all the pages right after it had to be renumbered. Now this is, from a scientific point of view, highly unsatisfactory.
There's no conclusive proof that Hayes inserted the page, but to John Cameron, it's the inevitable conclusion.
An evidence log is supposed to be an evidence log. It's supposed to go straight through. You can't go adding pages when you feel it might be helpful. And this is what Hayes had done.
The mystery thickens. Hayes swore on oath that the date on which he dissected the collar and discovered the Timer fragment was May the 12th, 1989. Thompson's evidence contradicts that claim.
We have recovered from the German files documentation which shows that the Germans were being told that this piece of fragment here was recovered from a slalom shirt on the 22nd of January 1990. Not only that, but the United States Department of Justice wrote a letter, and in that letter, in the statement of facts, they tell the Swiss authorities that that was found in a slalom shirt on the 22nd of January 1990.
The finding of the fragment of circuit board has been a major problem, because the Germans say it was found at one time, I think it was in January of 1990. But Hayes was to claim at the trial that, that he had found it and had done work in May of 1989. So the whole thing kind of stinks. I mean, there's something going on here.
It's an unheard of situation. I've never had a case where you've had one scientist saying, well, it was found, 9 months before, others say it was found.
Somebody's telling lies. Either they're telling lies about it being found on the 12th of May 1989, or they're telling lies about it being found on the 22nd of January 1990. It can't be found twice.
It's the fragment of Timer found in the collar of the grey shirt that's supposed to link al-Megrahi to the bomb. This is the same grey shirt for which one of the evidence labels has been altered. The same grey shirt that unaccountably changes shape in the Scottish and German police files. In his first statement to the police, Tony Gauci lists the clothes he says he sold to the mysterious customer in Mary's house.
2 pairs of trousers, 3 pairs of pyjamas, 1 umbrella, 1 baby grow and 1 cardigan. Now, there's a problem there, because not included in that list of clothing that he claims to have sold is a grey slalom shirt.
In fact, Gauci's first police statement makes no mention of any shirt, grey or otherwise. In January 1990, Gauci was questioned again about the shirt by Detective Chief Inspector Henry Woods Bell and by Detective Constable John Crawford. Both declined to be interviewed for this programme.
He's shown this fragment here, if I can show you that. But then he says a very interesting thing. He says, that time when the man came, I am sure I...
That time when the man came, I am sure I did not sell him a shirt.
And he repeats that later on. He reinforces it. He says, that man didn't buy any shirts for sure.
That man didn't buy any shirts for sure.
On the 10th of September 1990, Tony Gauci made another statement to DCI Bell and to Detective Sergeant Pat Byrne. Byrne hasn't responded to approaches from this programme. By now, something had jogged Tony Gauci's memory.
And listen to what he says here. About 3 weeks ago, I was cleaning boxes out in the shop, and I now remember that the man who bought the clothing also bought a beige slalom shirt and a blue and white striped shirt.
In the original handwritten statement, Police Sergeant Byrne has crossed out the word beige. A transcript shows that the word beige has disappeared from the text fed into the police computer. But this is contradicted by the Maltese police statement, which keeps the word beige. The shirt, of course, was supposed to be a grey man's shirt. New research raises even more profound questions about the evidence that links al-Megrahi to the grey shirt.
What he does say in his evidence to the court was that the grey slalom shirt which he sold was a size 16.5, 42 shirt. That's a 16.5 collar, also known as a size 42.
If the collar size of the grey shirt was 16.5, it could only be an adult man's shirt. But Thompson has discovered a witness who contradicts this.
This morning we're going to try and trace a man called Tony Caruana. He was one of the shirt manufacturers way back in 1990. We think we're going to be able to track this man down to a shoe shop in Valletta, and that's where we're heading just now.
In 1990, the man Thompson has come to see made a statement to Detective Constable John Crawford, which was not introduced at the trial.
Mr. Caruana, you expressed an opinion at the time about the size of the shirt. Can you tell me what that opinion was?
Yes, I still remember vividly. My personal view is that the front of the shirt happens to be a boy's shirt.
Yes, yes indeed. And what about the pocket size? Did that mean anything to you?
It was a very tight pocket, small pocket, which fits a boy's shirt.
Yes.
With a men's shirt, the pocket would be wider. You can put in a pack of cigarettes. Or...
I think you mentioned that in your original statement,
yes,
maybe.
And I still confirm that.
You still confirm that. So there's no doubt in your mind whatsoever, and what you told the police way back in 1990 was, in your opinion, that what they were showing you and what you're showing a photograph of today was in fact a boy's shirt.
Yes, I'm still of that opinion.
Thanks very much.
That happens to be a boy's shirt.
Okay. Thank you. Can't be clearer than that. Thank you.
Thompson has found the name of another witness who was also interviewed about the shirt by Detective Constable Crawford.
Hi there. Do you know where Tower Road is, please? Okay. That's the horse. Is that it then?
The next witness used to supply shirts to the Gauchi shop.
There we go.
His 1990 police statement was not introduced at the trial.
When I came the last time, we showed you a photograph of a fragment of shirt, and you said a rather interesting thing in that you thought it was a boy's shirt. Can you tell me why you thought it was a boy's shirt?
Well, I thought it was a boy's shirt, mainly for two things. One, because of the size of the pocket.
Of the pocket, yeah.
And the placket was also very narrow. It was almost the width of a lady's blouse.
Can you point to the placket on there?
The placket is the piece in front. Generally, it's interlined.
And that was narrow.
Generally, a standard men's shirt is about 34 millimeters, while that was about 25 millimeters.
And that would be on this fragment piece here that,
yes,
that you saw?
Same thing, yes.
Yeah. And going way back to 1990, can you remember a Scottish police detective coming to see you, maybe along with Maltese officers, and they would show you the actual piece of shirt?
Yes, I remember.
You remember that?
I remember seeing the fabric.
Yeah. And at that time, you told them that you thought it was a boy's shirt?
Yes.
That's good. Okay. Okay. As you could see there today, he stuck right by the story in that he can say with some certainty that what he has there is a boy's shirt. And, you know, at the risk of boring you, you can't describe just how important that is. It's crucial to the case. It breaks the chain completely.
Michael Mansfield is one of the great English defence lawyers, and he said that if there's a miscarriage of justice, it will be in two areas. Firstly, in witness identification, and the other on corrupt forensic evidence.
One of the main issues in Lockerbie, in fact, for me, the main issue in Lockerbie, and it's the only basis, really, upon which the remaining conviction stood, was identification.
Ian McKee has long experience of Scottish police procedures. He served for 30 years in the force, rising to the rank of superintendent.
I could not tell you how worried I am about the identification evidence in the Lockerbie case. It's central to the success of the prosecution, and it's totally flawed from beginning to end.
The evidence that convicted al-Megrahi goes back to Mary's house and to Tony Gauchi's description of the mysterious Libyan who came shopping one evening. Gauchi's statement was taken on September the 1st, 1989, by Detective Chief Inspector Henry Woods Bell.
In the first statement, he described him as being 6 foot or more in height. Gauchi went on to say he had a big chest and a large head.
His hair was very black. He was speaking Libyan to me.
He was speaking Libyan to me. He was from Libya.
According to Thompson, an unknown hand has altered Gauchi's statement. The phrase about the customer being from Libya has been added later in smaller handwriting and darker ink. 12 days later, Gauchi went to a Maltese police station to help with a photo fit of the suspect. Gauchi added new detail to his description. He said the man was about 50 years of age and about 16.5 or 17-inch collar.
I think the easiest thing to do is to show you the result of the artist's impression. And that came out. It's meant to be Mr. McGrachy, yeah.
And what are the differences?
One simple difference, it looks nothing like him.
The broad-shouldered, 6 feet tall, dark-skinned, 50-year-old man bears little resemblance to the 5 feet 8-inch, light-skinned, 37-year-old al-Megrahi. In the course of the next few months, Gauchi was asked to view photographs of suspects a number of times.
Going back to witnesses time and time again should not be allowed, and the court should not allow it, the prosecution should not allow it, because what happens is that pressure's put on them, pressure to identify someone, pressure to, if you like, solve a crime. And eventually I think most witnesses will crumble under that.
It was not until 15 months after his first police statement, when Gauchi was shown this photo array, that he finally made a positive identification. But the procedure followed by detectives Bell and Crawford has been criticised.
What is alleged to have happened is that Gauchi said they all look younger. And if you see his statement here, this would appear to be where it comes in. He says, the first impression I had was that all of the photographs were of men younger than the man who bought the clothing.
I told Mr. Bell this. I was asked to look at all the photographs carefully and to try and allow for any age differences.
What was said to him was, consider if they were maybe 15 years older, how would they look? Now that's a clear breach of identification procedures.
It was only after he'd been asked to imagine these men were 15 years older that Gauchi went through the pictures face by face until he picked out photo number 8, Abdul Basit al-Megrahi.
He was obviously coached by the police, and no one has denied that. I mean, it was quite obvious that he'd been spoken to by detectives and a number of times before he made the identification. It seems obvious as well that he wasn't sure, and he certainly only increased as it came towards the time for court. That evidence is totally valueless, and unfortunately it's critical.
It's a long time since the locals have seen Gauchi in his favourite hangout. On Malta, it's widely believed that in return for the evidence he gave in court, Gauchi has banked his share of the reward money and moved abroad.
Yeah. I used to come here a lot. This
lad here told me off camera that he was, he'd gone to Australia, but he won't say anything on camera. He may have the money, but he's lost, I think he's lost respect.
When Thompson drove past Gauchi's last known address, there was no sign of the man, but an expensive sports car was parked in the drive. Under Scottish law, witnesses can't be offered reward money lest it taint their evidence. But the American government had posted a $4 million reward for information leading to an arrest. Next time Thompson drove past, he glimpsed a grey-haired man in a red polo shirt. He certainly looked like Gauchi. On the third drive past, Thompson spotted the same man being driven off in a green car.
There's him in that car.
Thompson tailed the car because he wanted Gauchi to confirm or deny reports that the US Department of Justice paid him $2 million. But then the green car spotted our camera, and the next stop was a police station. As he climbed the stairs, Thompson got a good look at him.
So, George, was that him?
Definitely yes. I'm now 200% sure, because I've just been questioned by the police and asked why I'm interested in Tony Gauchi.
Mr. Gauchi declines to be interviewed for this program. Scottish police maintain that Gauchi showed no interest in any reward money before the trial. But Scotland's Criminal Case Review Commission found that extracts from Detective Chief Inspector Bell's diary cast a new light on that claim.
The diaries appear to suggest that Mr. Gauchi was interested in monetary compensation, and that indications were given to him that money was available.
It was flawed from top to bottom. It seems as if Gauchi was coached in his evidence and he was given money for his evidence. Identification evidence like that has got no value at all.
All I can say is I had made it very clear, as I was tried to express earlier, that we were very conscious that the eyes of the world would be on us, and it would not look good if there was any suggestion that there was any reward money or anything like that. He certainly wasn't motivated by that.
George Thompson's dogged detective work has raised many new questions about the prosecution of Abdel Basit al-Megrahi. Did Tony Gauchi sell any shirts at all to the mysterious shopper? If he sold a shirt, was it beige or was it grey? Was it a man's shirt or a boy's shirt? When was the time a fragment found in the shirt's collar? Was it January 1990 or May 1989? Why did the forensic scientist, who swore it was May, change the page numbers in his log? Why did the policeman, who should have signed the evidence label first, seem to sign it last? Why was the word on the evidence label changed? And when the debris was found to contain the fragment of the timer, why was it never tested for explosive residue? From prison cells in Holland and Scotland, al-Megrahi spent 8 years trying to win the right to appeal against his conviction.
He bitterly resented the fact that people thought that he could have carried out a crime like the downing of that aircraft, particularly where children were concerned. And I've seen him sitting crying in the visit, and just desperation. How could they do this to me? Why people will think I am a murderer?
Al-Megrahi did finally win the right to appeal, but his case was never heard. Diagnosed with cancer and given months to live, al-Megrahi dropped his appeal. The next week, he was released from prison on compassionate grounds. At the airport, prison officers shook al-Megrahi's hand. He'd been well liked in jail, and no one there believed he was really guilty. Al-Megrahi flew home to Libya and a hero's welcome. Scottish authorities denied they'd made dropping his appeal a condition of his release. But when he did abandon his appeal, it meant that the full story of how al-Megrahi's case was conducted may never be heard in court or exposed to public scrutiny.
The criminal justice system in Scotland has lost its honour because of Megrahi's conviction.
Personally, I think the case will go on and on and on. As cases do, the truth will always come out in the end. Sometimes we have to wait a rather long time.
So many of the Americans seem outraged that he didn't die within 3 months. I'm glad he didn't. I'm glad he had time with his family, because he was clearly innocent. It was clearly a miscarriage of justice.
What still haunts George Thompson about the Lockerbie case is this. If his evidence is right, then those who bombed Pan Am 103 and killed 270 innocent victims still walk free.
"14 years old at the time. Never forget, never forgive."